So before we get started on the serious questions, we wanted to start with a slightly less serious question for you, Ken. And that is, you talk in this book a lot about your experience playing chess. And so can you tell us about how chess you think has impacted your way of seeing the world?
Well, first of all, for me, it's not a less serious question. I take chess very seriously. But
Point taken.
no, I think there's so many ways that it's influenced how I think about things. For example, I led a somewhat more bohemian life being a chess player. I actually earned quite decent money as a teenager doing that, but it was definitely, meet different kinds of people. And you certainly realize that there's an underground economy beyond just, I think, drugs, which I didn't do, but many people pick up on, that there's just a lot of cash transactions and things going on. So, inform me that way.
So, Ken, let me start with a more boring question, but I would like you to explain to our listeners why the dollar dominance is so important economically for the well-being of the United States, because very often this is not understood broadly. How much money is this worth to you and me and Bethany?
Well, I mean, I need to start out. I'm an economist, Luigi, and I'd say we don't know exactly, what the number is. But I mean, estimates are that our interest rates are 0.5% to 1% lower than they would be otherwise, not just on the government, on us, on Luigi, Bethany, and Ken. So if there's a big pool of demand for our debt, it makes interest rates lower. So that's the most obvious thing. But there really a lot of other things that are important. So when we have a crisis, the pandemic, the financial crisis, and we need to really try to borrow a lot to fight the crisis, to increase government spending, to make transfers, whatever it is, to bail out the financial system, whatever we're doing, we can go big in a way that's difficult for anybody else. Now, anybody can go big. The question is, how do the markets react? And with the dollar until now, and we'll discuss that, but the last couple times, we've been able to borrow a lot without seemingly damaging our borrowing capacity. And then, so you will notice that next time when we have a big crisis, if our exorbitant privilege, if the dollar being the reserve currency, if the dollar being on top has become less, and I think it is headed in a downward direction, we may feel some pushback. Our government may be more reluctant. And then a third way, which I think is also very important, is we are able to use that to put ourselves at the heart, at the pulse of the global financial system. It's not just that everybody uses the dollar. It's that we control the way the rules of the game are made, which partly has to do with our military also. We can come to that, but also has to do with the dominance of the dollar. Why is that important? Well, we live in an information world where everyone's trying to have information, spying, marketing, you name it. And that's one area where we just dominate. We see so much. And when we want to use it against you by putting in sanctions, we're able to do that. I think we have sanctions on some 20 odd countries at the moment. We have used it in lieu of military intervention. I'm not saying it works, but don't think it doesn't matter. So all of these things are incredible advantages to having the dollar not just be on top, but be so far on top.
So there's a relationship I don't entirely understand. There are two concepts here, I think. One is a strong dollar versus a weak dollar, and the other is the dollar being the reserve currency. And can you have one without the other? In other words, can you have a weak dollar and have it still be, or a dollar that is much weaker than it is today vis-a-vis other countries, and still have it be the reserve currency? Or does the loss of A inevitably cause the loss of B?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. They're vaguely related, but the thing we really care about over the long run is having the dollar be like English, that everybody uses it. That's what brings our interest rates down on a long-term basis. Over the cycle, sometimes the dollar's high. It's very high right now. It's been coming down, but it's very high. but it's been very low, and we've still been on top. It's not even clear whether you want the dollar to be high or low, by the way. I mean, we as individuals might benefit us in one way or another. If the dollar's low, that's really good. If you're selling stuff abroad, if you run a restaurant that gets a lot of foreign tourists. On the other hand, if the dollar's high, that's fantastic for you if you're planning a visit to Japan right now, which the yen, that's their currency, is really weak. But it's a separate thing, and I do think they're often confused. In fact, I think the president confuses them often.
I love the relationship that you use in the book between, the analogy, between the language and the currency. For many reasons. One is, of course, both this element of natural externality, but the second is that languages have many uses, as money and currencies have many uses. And so we know that for a long time in Europe, people were speaking a language to each other, but then using a different language to write about science. They was using Latin, and maybe a different language to write about poetry. And in the same way, of course, but for our listener, money is a medium of exchange, but is also a unit of account, is a store of value, and the competition can take place in different segment of the use of money, and it doesn't need necessarily to be the same for all three. So the dominance of the dollar at the moment is on all three dimensions. But technology can break this link because in the past, this link was very much driven by our limited ability to do, for example, calculation in our heads. Today, when you travel throughout Europe, you can pay with a credit card and you don't even know whether they charge you in dollar or in euro. In the past, this was, of course, not possible. So this is a long introduction to say, to what extent the introduction of technology changes the nature of competition among currencies, and to what extent can create maybe a segmentation in which one currency is used as a medium of exchange, but another is used as a store of value?
Well, you're asking a super deep question, and I don't even know where to begin to start. But the first thing to say is that in some respects, it's natural to have one currency. There are 150 plus currencies, and most people have no idea what the currencies in smaller countries are worth. And if you're an exporter from an Asian country to an African country, you probably want to get paid in dollars. You don't want to learn about their local currency. You don't want to have to study what their central bank is doing. So there's advantages to having a common currency. I see a lot of analytical models that say it has to be one, because, of course, the network effects are the biggest when you have just one. But it doesn't have to be just one. I mean, we have a few different credit cards, MasterCard, Visa, American Express, for example. We don't have 150 of them. They don't really, work that well. In other words, we do, but most of them are very small. So, there are these network effects. You're right that technology is potentially affecting the use of the dollar, so it could still be the unit of account, but you're going through different rails, different veins of the global financial system in order to do things. And in fact, that's really what the Europeans and the Chinese really want to break free from. They don't want us to see what we're doing. So if they had a way to transact labeled in dollars, I'm going to charge you in dollars, you're going to pay me in dollars, but the United States will never see it, that would be really good for them. I mean, that would accomplish a lot of what they want to do. And technology potentially offers that, but I just want to say, not so easy. It's not so trivial, because what happens is occasionally there's a crisis. And when there's a crisis, sometimes there's you need somebody who can just print dollars to step in and solve things. So part of the problem is today it's such a big world. First of all, China has a lot of incentives to break off its dollar peg. China made this development choice that they would tie their currency to the dollar. That was the best thing that ever happened to the dollar because, as everybody knows, China boomed, Asia boomed. Asia today is half the dollar bloc by many measures. And China has, I think we understand, very good reasons to try to break away. They've been doing it actually for about a decade, but now that they've seen the sanctions in Russia and other, they're going to do less. So it's efficient for them to keep using the dollar. If that was the only thing they cared about, if we agreed on everything, if they didn't worry about the United States bossing them around on issues they care about, they would keep it. But, even Europe doesn't like how much power the dollar has. We imposed sanctions on Iran just over a decade ago, and I don't know what's around the corner these days. And Europe disagreed. Europe had good reasons, they felt, for disagreeing. And we were able to bully Europe into doing what we wanted because we said, if you don't, we're going to cut off your banks. And so there are geopolitical reasons to have, more spheres of influence, that, more currencies than we have now.
So if you had to choose a multiple choice question, if you had to choose what power is in today's world, is it the country that makes things? Is it the country that has the reserve currency, or is it the country with the biggest military?
Oh boy, that's a tough question. I think if you have the biggest military, you use it to seize the countries that make things. I think being the country that makes things is less and less important, let's face it. We live in an era where robotics is coming, where we can substitute for that. So you certainly want to be a big financial power. That's not going away anytime soon. That's an incredible advantage. I wish the U.S. administration saw it that way. I think when we don't have it, we'll feel it. But I also think being a military power is unfortunately very important. We live in a very unstable world. And a very important point, I don't think you can be the top dog or whatever you want to call it in currency if you're not a powerful military. Europe has suffered from that. And when the euro remilitarizes, which it's being forced to do, it will become a more powerful currency.
First of all, needs to remilitarize. Second, needs to coordinate its military, which is a bit complicated. Yeah.
Yes, may not happen. Yes. No, I realize just spending, but everybody. If New York State had its own national, military, and California had its own military and our own missile defense system, not going to be very efficient. And unfortunately, that's not a bad description of Europe.
But so how badly can the United States do and still retain its dominance? Because in a world that is probably tripolar, it's going to be maybe the competition is going to be more intense. And at some point, especially the Asian countries will say, why do we need to use a currency that is not reliable? If we really expect the fiscal problems to come to roost and have maybe higher inflation, etc., they might opt out. So what are the limits of our fiscal profligacy that would be supported by the system?
I think everybody's looking at exactly what you said, Luigi. Wait a second, okay, we were going into this tripolar system, but the dollar was still way on top. Do we trust the United States? Do we trust that this money is not going to get inflated down and devalued, which is exactly what happened just over 50 years ago when we went off the Bretton Woods gold standard. Individuals couldn't trade dollars for gold, but countries could. we went off of that, and that de-anchored the system. Is something coming again? I do believe that our fiscal deficits are vulnerable to having higher interest rates, and we have higher interest rates. And then if we lose some of our ability to place cash abroad to get everybody else to hold our money, that's going to exacerbate the problem. Our interest rates will go up even more. And I don't know how that'll end, but I think it will end in a burst of inflation. That won't actually be the end, but that'll be, a wake-up call. And boy, if you're the managing China's central reserves, or you're managing even the UK's central reserves, it was very painful in 1933 when Roosevelt went off the gold standard. It was very painful in 1971 when Nixon went off it, and it's going to be painful again. And I think one of the things that's causing everyone to move a little faster towards a more tripolar system, as you say, is exactly this fiscal policy. And it's interrelated with central bank independence, because if we thought the central bank would just stick to keeping inflation low come hell or high water, we'd have a little more confidence. But I think that too has been undermined, not just by Trump, by both sides. The progressives hate central bank independence. So I think everybody's hoping they have enough time to diversify more, but they might or might not.
So if I try to, you've been critical of this administration and the risks it's courting. If I were to try to break these things into different categories, and let me just try this and see if you'd agree with it. It seems that perhaps the Trump administration's general threats and desire for a weaker dollar is not quite the same thing, as the administration perhaps weakening the use of the dollar as a reserve currency. And so if we take the first as maybe, okay, we can have a debate about whether a weaker dollar might be good for some U.S. businesses or not. Put that in one category. And then let's look at this other category of moving away from the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency. That maybe would seem like there's some blame due to both parties for both fiscal irresponsibility and lack of central bank independence. And then perhaps layer on a little bit more directed at the Trump administration for lack of U.S. trustworthiness, for lack of a better way to put it. Is there something else that would you think of it in the same sort of schematic? And is there something that I'm missing?
So my book was actually written without knowing who would win the election. And I felt, we're in this decline, had fiscal problems, central bank independence problem, even without the many flourishes that Trump has brought. But I think the administration is actually very clear-eyed that you want everyone to use the dollar. You just want its value to come down. In fact, I think at times, when the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, South Africa, China, India, when they're talking about doing more trade with the renminbi or their own currency, he said, you do that, I'm going to punish you. I don't want that to happen. And I think that was actually counterproductive, but he was correctly understanding that was not what he meant by having a weaker dollar. What he meant was having the value less. He's lucky in that the dollar's really high right now in its purchasing power, and the exchange rates are extremely difficult to predict. But actually, when the dollar's this far out of line, he's probably going to get a weaker dollar even if he shuts up and doesn't do anything. That's probably a wish he'll get. I think it would have happened under Harris. We had the dollar this high in 2002, 1985. And I'm talking about the purchasing power parity. So, a simple way is how much does a Big Mac cost in different countries, or a Starbucks, or some common currency. But you can look at much more sophisticated baskets of goods. If your listeners have any friends who are visiting from abroad, I guarantee you they're going to think it's really expensive here. And if they're old enough, they will remember times just maybe 5 or 10 years ago for some countries when they thought it was really cheap here. And so we're definitely at a cycle where the dollar's high, but I don't know how effectively Trump and his people can push it down. But I think they're looking to have both, and you can have both. The dollar's been on top, and we've had, as we discussed, periods where it's been at high, periods where it's been low.
Now, one of the policies of Trump is to push very hard in favor of cryptos and in favor also of stablecoins. And to the extent stablecoins become an alternative medium of exchange for international transactions, they can provide two problems for the dominance of the dollar. Number one is they erode at least part of the seigniorage, because part of the seigniorage will be appropriated by the owner of the stable coins that are very, very happy. But the second, there's also an informational element, which is very important. As you said at the beginning, in information economy, is very valuable to know what people do. And today we know through the Fed, because all the transactions need to clear, all the international transactions had to clear through the Fed. The moment they clear through stable coins, they have different system. So we lose that advantage. So what should you tell Trump to say, look, this is the wrong strategy if you want to maintain the dominance of the dollar?
Well, I actually think just a couple of years ago, Trump was making all sorts of statements. I don't like crypto. It undermines the dollar. I don't know his exact words, but you can find that. This is a bad idea. It's amazing what some campaign donations, will do to change somebody's mind. What's going on, I think he's making a huge mistake that'll hurt not just everybody, but him eventually on what he's doing. Okay, so I think everyone knows, but he actually holds a lot of Bitcoin now, and it's, there are no words for it, corrupt beyond imagination, that he's holding over $1 billion in Bitcoin. It's become his son's, one of their big businesses, and he's the regulator. He has a big influence over what it's worth. Why? Because Bitcoin, well, the president doesn't control it. But what he does control is the infrastructure around Bitcoin. It's a banking system. Most people, if you were to ask your class, Luigi, how many people hold Bitcoin, you'll probably find a lot raise their hands. That's what I do, I find. But they're not doing it on chain, which is the kind of cryptographic trades. They're, take some sophistication. I'm not saying our students don't have a lot of sophistication. They're doing it through one of these super convenient bank type entities. I have a paper on this, and there are other people who do. And we estimate, 95, 98% of all the transactions are done through a banking system that's an overlay over crypto. That you can regulate. It's just a banking system. We don't. Not really, not much. That's changing, but we haven't changed it yet. That explodes the value of Bitcoin because it's exactly like our English example. It gives it network effects where everybody can hold it, everybody can trade it. That is driving up the price. Why is it a problem? Well, you listed some reasons, and I'm going to come to them. They're really important, what you said. But one reason right now is it's a banking system that's not regulated like our regular banking system. There was a major bill passed, not long ago in the Senate that would be a step towards this. But if you're not regulating it, we know what's going to happen. There are going to be banking crises. We had that with FTX. That was a big exchange, Samuel Bankman-Fried, just a couple of years ago. It's going to happen again. But it's going to be much. It's going to be much worse when it happens again, because now pension funds are buying it. It's being spread much more into the system. So that's a problem. You list a very good problem, which also, if we're not auditing them, we're not requiring the same things we require from banks. And I'm not arguing it should be parallel exactly. We're losing this information. Who's getting it now? There's some, I don't want to, advertise names. There's some that are really regulated here and pretty compliant with requests from the United States. I don't think Tether is. That's the biggest stable quote unquote coin. I have on fairly good information that the Russian and the Chinese do a lot of their trade to avoid our financial sanctions through Tether and other things like that. I mean, we don't want that. So there's a lot of power being lost. And then lastly, going back to the banking crisis, if these things aren't backed, if they're not regulated, they're going to blow up. Even a very well-run one will run into trouble when there's a crisis. So we can have stable coins, I want to be clear, but they need to be regulated like banks, and they ultimately need to be in dollars or in euros. And if they're in dollars, they need to be backed by the Fed. If they're in euros, they need to be backed by the ECB or something equivalent. So it's a very interesting transition, but we're in this wild west, evidently for at least 3.5 more years, where the space is exploding, but it's not yet really being regulated.
So we've had prominent people on this podcast, including Eugene Fama, who have made predictions about Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, going to zero. You have your own analysis of what might make cryptocurrency go away. Do you care to share it with our listeners?
Yeah, no, interesting. I forgot that Gene said that because I've listed Paul Krugman, Warren Buffett, Jamie Dimon, Nouriel Roubini as people who said it would go to zero, and I'll now add Gene Fama. I think that's wrong. And I'm going to go back to my chess days of having lived life and seen the underground economy. The underground economy, which is mostly tax evasion, of course, it's human trafficking and drugs and illicit military sales and everything, but it's mostly avoiding taxes. There are different estimates. Again, this is another thing I have a paper on. It's talk about it in the book. The World Bank has estimates. I would say 20% of the global economy is a low side estimate. And I know, Bethany, you read my first book, was very engaged with this issue. And crypto is moving in here. That's a market. We're already not controlling it. This is a market where everybody's trying to avoid being caught. And so that's a big market. It ain't going to zero as long as that market's there. Of course, if you're in the mainstream, it can be worth much more. And by the way, I believe that even today, by far, the main use of certainly not stable coins, but other kinds of cryptocurrencies is totally the global underground economy. That's the main use. And the idea that you can have legitimate banks, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Goldman, I'm not trying to pick on anyone, everybody's issuing various kinds of cryptocurrency assets. It's like issuing, ETFs, exchange traded funds, linked to blood diamonds. I mean, why would you want to allow that? So no, it's not going to zero. But the question is, its current value is based on its moving into the legal economy, which I didn't really get to the final point about Trump. It's going to blow up. We're going to have a crypto-based financial crisis within his term. And I don't know what he's going to do. He'll react. I think he'll rein everything in. I don't know what he'll do to his own Bitcoin holdings. But it's like a banking crisis, and we're going to have it if we don't regulate it.
Now that's a prediction.
No, I'm making a solid prediction.
I don't know whether you have read The Changing World Order by Ray Dalio, but he has this view that big powers overextend themselves militarily, and then when they overextend, they become fiscally unsustainable, and then they collapse. And your book reminds me, in their negative predictions, is somewhat similar to that. So, what is your reaction to that?
As you must know, Ray Dalio is a great investor, one of the great hedge funds. There's not a lot of references in his book besides to his own work, including what other historians say. His most recent book has many echoes of 2009. This time it's different. but no citations. So, certainly Toynbee and other people, talked about cycles and stuff. Yeah, I mean, you can make mistakes whether you're the top power or whether you're Russia or whether you're China in over investing in the military. You can be a minor player in over investing in the military. I don't think the U.S. has done that. I don't think that's not the source of our fiscal problems. The source of our fiscal problems is we have this belief that we just don't ever have to lower our debt. Debt relative income was 30% in 1980 for the United States, 60% in 2005, 90% in 2009, 120% today. We've gone from the system where we would fight a war, have a financial crisis, and we would sort of take whatever steps to let it come down. And now we just say, well, we don't care. And this belief that the interest rates would always be very, very low and they were never going to rise. Oops, they've come up the last few years. And now I won't say that the real interest rate's necessarily higher than the growth rate. I mean, they're close to each other, but you can't just wait it out if you want debt to go away. And you do have this concern that if you go from plateau to plateau, I think we'll have another crisis. I don't know what it'll be over the next 5 or 10 years, cyber crisis, pandemic, Martian invasion. I have no idea. But we'll have things, or war, a real war. And I promise you, when we have it, we will try to bring our debt to another plateau and then another plateau. And I think we've reached a situation where markets may push back. And I don't argue necessarily in favor of austerity, but goodness, I mean, Biden ran deficits over 6% of GDP. And I don't want to get up into some political thing, but I mean, it's uninspiring how much infrastructure we actually built or how much we actually did. Trump, as we speak, we don't yet know where he's going. I'm betting we get an even bigger deficit to GDP. I mean, so we're just really taking our chances on what comes next.
Why are you so sure that it has changed now and that we've reached a point where it has changed? A tiny bit of context. I think I was on Meet the Press back in 2009. Maybe it was right after the global financial crisis. And I too argued this is over. A debt burden now matters. We have to start to care. And so, and obviously I'm just a journalist. I'm not an economist. But there have been people warning about this for 15 years and it hasn't mattered. Maybe arguably it does now. But I guess maybe it's a two-part question. Why are you sure that now that it does matter again? And what's the sort of historical explanation for why obvious things that common sense would argue they matter, they don't matter, and they don't matter, and they don't matter? Why can we ignore common sense for such a long period of time and then all of a sudden it catches up with us? Is there a chess analogy?
Well, sort of. I mean, there's this famous saying, I think, coming from Simon, what I quote Rudy Dornbush, my thesis advisor, that crises take much longer to unfold than you think they would, but then they happen much faster than you think they can when you see something unsustainable. What's gone on here is that we had real interest rates, inflation-adjusted interest rates, reach a phenomenal peak in the early 1980s because the central banks were having to crack down on inflation, but nobody believed them. So they kept having to raise interest rates more and more. Volcker raised interest rates to almost 20% at some point. And of course, the interest rates were very high. So it allows Larry Summers in his Brookings paper from 6 years ago to draw this graph of interest rates coming down. But if you look at a longer period, and I have an American Economic Review paper on this published last August, longer term historical data, there are giant fluctuations in these things. Sometimes it's low. I mean, it was really low in the Great Depression until it wasn't. There are times when it's high. I think the thing I really object to is this confidence that interest rates will stay low. I think we shouldn't have that confidence. that was a surprise to markets, to everybody, that interest rates stayed as low as they did. I think if the pandemic hadn't happened, we'd have experienced this rise in interest rates sooner. I don't know that it's going to last, but I actually think the odds of interest rates going up are as good as they're going down. I'm not talking about what the Federal Reserve does. The market sets these longer 10-year rates. I think the odds of it going up are as much as it going down. So what I would say is, sure, artificial intelligence may rescue us. I think it's more likely to ruin us than to rescue us, but it may rescue us. There may be some relatively minor fix, like just running a 2% deficit instead of a 7% deficit, that works for a long time. But where I see things is we have an American voter who's just not willing to take that. I just came from New York City, where this very charismatic progressive won the Democratic primary, and, just sounding like we can just spend more on everything. We can have free this, free that. It's sort of Bernie Sanders. And it's wonderful. He's very charismatic, but that's a very strong wing of the Democratic Party. The Republican Party thinks anytime you cut taxes, you should just look the other way, no matter what that happens. And it wins. It wins for the Democrats. It wins for the Republicans. I don't see having a change until we have a crisis. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I really object to people who are absolutely sure everything's fine. They're really, selling you some medicine that you don't want to take.
If there is time for one last question, since you are in the business of dire predictions, what is your prediction about Japan? Because Japan has been running in conditions worse than the United States for quite some time now, and while things are deteriorating, it's still standing.
Well, I object a little bit to say I'm in the business of entire dire predictions. If you read my writings and my book, it's very measured. Oh, I think Japan's in trouble, actually, though, if you're asking. So it's very interesting. So many people point to Japan and say, they prove debt doesn't matter. They have twice as much as the United States. Have you looked at Japan's growth performance over the last 30 years, 35 years? They've gone from the top of the table, depends on what statistic you pick, whether it was richer than the United States per capita or not, to the bottom. I mean, I'm actually, by a lot of measures, I think Japan's below Italy now, and I'm not meaning to cast aspersions on Italy, but Italy's poorer than Mississippi. I mean, by some measure, it's not culturally necessarily, but in terms of its GDP per capita, and of course it's China, it's their demographics, but who are you kidding that it's their policy of stuffing debt into the financial system, the pension funds, the insurance companies? Suddenly, they're having to raise interest rates. They haven't had to do it for 20 years, and there's all this debt sitting on the books of everything. The central bank, I forgot to mention them, they hold 100% of GDP practically in debt. The insurance companies, pension funds, the banks, interest rates are going up. Everybody's actuarially bankrupt. And they have real problems in Japan of dealing with this. That's why the yen is so absurdly low at the moment. They're afraid to raise interest rates. Believe me, the Bank of Japan knows this. So I think that if you're asking what's a big country to watch near term, it would be how Japan handles this. They've done an amazing in that they've maintained social cohesion more than we do in the United States. But if we are being presented with Japan to where don't worry about our debt, that's what we can do, which so many people do. I won't name names, but you can look it up. It's just stupid. I mean, we don't want to go there. We want to do better than that.